Chapter 1. Amanda Romriell drove through the dark streets of Salt Lake City, humming under her breath. It had been the first really good day in a long while for her. She'd spent the entire day at her sister Alyssa's house, with all her sisters. They'd discussed all the possible ways they could save the lake house, where they'd spent time every summer. The house was filled with memories, and her parents thought they should sell it. What were they thinking? Her only light for a while had been working and having lunch with her mom once per week. She had told her mother everything about what had happened with Dylan and cried on her shoulder. No one could have possibly been more sympathetic than Elizabeth. She pulled into her driveway, looking at how dark it looked. No windows were on. No one was there to greet her. It was just her. She'd been sure she and Dylan would have a long, happy life together. His photo was on the credenza in her entryway, and she picked it up, looking at his face. "I miss you. More than I could ever express." She set the picture down as she headed into her living room, kicking off her shoes. Her house was perfect, as always. Everything was in its place. She had designed it herself, and she had always found it to be one of the most comfortable spaces in the world. She sat down on the couch and picked up the remote just as her cell phone rang. She pulled it out of her pocket and looked at the display. She didn't really want to deal with people that night. She had spent the whole day around her sisters, and while she loved them, they wore her out at times. As an introvert, it felt like every time she was around a group of people, she was completely worn out. Alyssa was on the phone, and she'd promised herself she would always answer for Alyssa. Her sister was in a terrible relationship, and she was sure the man Alyssa was dating would drive her to stop eating altogether. Or worse. "Hello?" There was a slow sucking in of air on the other end, and Amanda immediately went on alert. "Are you okay, Alyssa? Do you need me to come over?" All she could hear was a quick sob, and she got even more worried. "Alyssa?" Police came, the words were clear, though the tears in her sister's voice were just as real. "Were we too loud?" Amanda asked automatically. Though, she was sure Alyssa would have laughed if the police had been called for them being too loud. No, it was worse. Much worse. "What happened? Do you want to text me?" "Mom and Dad, car wreck." Amanda closed her eyes and gripped the phone harder. "How bad is it?" she asked. Their parents were their rocks. Each of the sisters relied on them, no matter what her age. "Dead." And then the sobbing was loud and uncontrolled on the other side. Glad she was already sitting down, Amanda sat for a moment, wondering what to do now. She needed her parents, both of them. How was she going to be able to make it without them? Amanda lost her voice as the tears started. She couldn't believe it. How could they really be gone? "Text," Alyssa said, obviously knowing that she could no longer speak. Amanda hung up and waited for the text. "Come tomorrow. We have to plan the funeral together. I'll be there no later than 10. Thank you. I'm calling Kayla next." Amanda shook her head. Alyssa was contacting everyone in order of their births. She was third. Alyssa was the oldest, and then came Taylor, Amanda, Kayla, and Lauren. As much as Amanda wanted to curl into herself and just die, her heart went out to her sister. She was sure she couldn't have made all those calls. "Love you," Amanda texted to Alyssa. Alyssa's job was awful. Amanda walked through her house in shock, going into her bathroom and taking a long hot shower. No one could see your tears if you cried while you were in the shower. She wished she hadn't had to learn that little piece of information, but she had. She put pajamas on and climbed into her bed, her eyes tightly closed. She would meet with her sisters the next day, and they'd find out it was all a mistake. Mom and Dad would come through the door, and they would be laughing over the mix-up. It was all going to be just fine. How could it be anything else? Asterisk. Thursday of that week, after the funeral on Wednesday and days spent mourning with her sisters, Amanda finally believed. And when they were left the lake house to either share or sell together, they all knew their answer. They were moving in together. The Romriell sisters would be together once again. The lake house would be a band B, and she would get to decorate it and help decide which renovations to do. They'd all move to Richland, Idaho, where they had spent so many happy summers, and together, they would change the house into their vision for it. Sharing a house would be very interesting. They hadn't lived together since they were young, and Amanda wasn't sure how long she'd last. She loved her sisters, but she loved being alone even more. Amanda drove home after the decision had been made, thrilled when Alyssa had finally had the courage to break up with Tim. Together, they were going to weather this storm and all the others. Now she just needed to get her house packed up so Alyssa could list it for sale. Asterisk. It was mid-April when 4 of the 5 sisters set out for Richland together. Kayla had to stay to finish up the house she was working on. She made her living as a house flipper, living in each house as she fixed it up. Richland was tiny and situated on Bear Lake, which was on the border of Idaho and Utah. All of the sisters had been raised just north of Salt Lake City, but now they would be living in Idaho. They had talked about living in the lake house all the time when they were small children. Now it was happening for Romriell. During the long drive, she thought of what she was leaving behind. Her designing firm she'd started a few years before and had finally built up to the point that she could choose her clients, her old house, and a whole lot of painful memories. She was doing the right thing. She just had to be. Asterisk. After their first night in the house, Amanda threw herself into her work. She made illustrations of what she wanted to happen in the kitchen, because that was the room they all agreed needed to be taken care of first, and then she went on to the bedrooms. It was her 3rd week in the house when she headed to the local hardware store to get some lemon yellow paint. While the paint was being mixed, she looked through their selection of drawer knobs and wasn't impressed at all. She wanted to buy locally and support the economy there, which wasn't great during the off-season, but how could she when the choices were abysmal? She chose a couple of things, but wondered if it would be better to shop online. When she went back to get the paint, the mixing was all done, and she put the buckets into her shopping cart, and then she walked to the front of the store. The cashier, there was a handsome man a few years older than she was. "Do you know if the owner would be willing to make some custom orders for me? I'm fixing up a house, and I'll need very specific things." "Oh, sure, he can order anything you need." The man smiled at her, and she felt positively dazzled. She shook her head for a moment before pulling out her phone and showing him what she was talking about. "Now, is it possible for me to sit down and talk to the owner?" Amanda asked. She wasn't used to working with people who weren't at the top of their food chains. It would be better for her to have an arrangement with the man so they could do things more efficiently. The man, his shirt said Ryan, nodded. "When do you want to meet up with him?" "I think Friday around 10. Will that work for him?" Amanda was thinking she could talk to the owner and then get lunch for everyone to eat. Lunch was almost always takeout for the sisters. "He'll be in that day." Ryan studied her intently, looking as if he wanted to say something, but he didn't. "Well, that's good." She pulled out her wallet to pay him for the paint. "I appreciate all your help today, Ryan, and I'll be sure to mention it to the store owner when I meet him on Friday." She took the cart with her as she pushed it out to her car and loaded the paint into the trunk. The end of Green Gables' room needed bright sunshine, and what better way to make that happen than to paint it lemon yellow? When she got home, she carried 1 can of paint in, and Nick, the man renovating their kitchen, who was just starting something with Alyssa, went out to get the other 2. He was a hard worker, and they were all thankful they'd found him to do the renovations. They knew Kayla could do most of the work, but that would require them to wait for a while. and none of them wanted that at all. After the shopping, Amanda knew she needed time alone, and she went up to her room with her Kindle in tow. For some reason, reading calmed her more than anything. Well, reading and of course Dylan, but Dylan was gone now. She sank onto her bed, thinking about the man for a moment, but when she started to feel that she was falling into the pit of despair, she knew it was time to get out of it. Maybe she needed to see a counselor, but she wasn't quite ready to try it. No, she'd read a novel that took her right out of Idaho and plucked her in the middle of a land that would make her happy instead. Asterisk. On Friday morning, Amanda was up early and neatly dressed for her meeting with the owner of the hardware store. She wished she'd thought to get his name, but she'd have to figure it out. She had breakfast with her sisters as she usually did, and then she headed for her car. Amanda loved driving through the quaint little town that was little more than a stretch along the beach of Bear Lake. She drove the short distance, realizing she was 30 minutes early, and she chose to sit in her car and read rather than going in so early. She was never late, but being too early was just as rude as being late in her mind. She walked toward the store at 10 minutes before 10, knowing she might have to wait to meet with the man. A young man she'd never seen was at the register, and Amanda immediately knew he was fresh out of high school. He was flirting with whomever he was checking out, and Amanda waited until he was finished. "Hi, I'm Amanda Romriell. I'm here to see the owner of the store." "Yeah, sure. Ryan's in his office." "Do you know where it is?" Amanda's eyes narrowed. "Is there a Ryan here other than the owner by chance?" "No, ma'am. Just one Ryan." "Would you kindly direct me to the office?" she asked, seething inwardly. The man had been more than a little rude to let her think he was merely an employee. She wanted to go into his office and start yelling at him, but she knew better. That wasn't the way to start a new business relationship. She took deep breaths as she walked through the store, wanting to be able to smile and act like she knew it was him all along. She wasn't a great actress, but she hoped it would work. It was that or buy one of his sledgehammers and beat him about the head and shoulders, but that would be rude, even if he did deserve it. Chapter 2. Ryan Ziegler had always been a bit of a practical joker, and when a beautiful woman came into his store wanting to meet with the owner, he had to act like it wasn't him. He knew it was wrong, but she was too pretty not to tease. As far as he was concerned, teasing was just another form of flirting. He was sure she'd understand. He was sitting in his office at the chair behind the desk, waiting for her to come in and see it was him. Maybe she wouldn't keep talking to him like she had a bug up her nose then. He shook his head. He wasn't sure why he even cared what she thought of him. She was obviously just a bit too full of herself for a man like him to even make it onto her radar. Then she strode into the room, wearing a pair of pink slacks paired with a blouse with tiny butterflies on it, and he remembered. She was beautiful. He wanted to get to know her, but it was only physical. It had to be. She was too snotty for a lowly hardware store owner like him. She walked in and smiled at him, showing no surprise that it was him at all, which annoyed him a little. What was the fun of a practical joke when people didn't get annoyed? She sat down across from him, crossed one leg over the other, and smiled sweetly. "I never caught your last name, Mr. Ziegler." "Ryan Ziegler." "Oh, I do remember your first name. I never forget a name." She folded her hands primly in her lap. "I'm Amanda Romriell, and I'm an interior decorator. I just moved to Richland to help my sisters renovate the lake house that has been in our family for as long as any of us can remember." He smiled, nodding. "Romriell House, right? I remember seeing it all the time, and we'd make up stories about the princesses who lived there." Amanda laughed softly. "I'm anything but a princess, Mr. Ziegler. I'm just a hardworking woman who, along with my sisters, has a dream. Part of my dream is to be able to make orders through your establishment, Because I would prefer to work with local businesses. I have a supplier in Salt Lake City, but I'd rather be able to make a deal with you, if that's possible. Ryan leaned forward, loving the idea of being a supplier for someone. What would you need from me to make it happen? He probably shouldn't have played mind games with her when she was only trying to bring him business. She raised an eyebrow. I presume you have the ability to make specialty orders? Of course. Ryan wanted to kick her. She really was rude. He was an underling and nothing more. But she was bringing business into his store, and she was awfully nice to look at. I would like to be able to place specialty orders through you for a 20% discount. He shook his head. I could never go over 5. That would be eating my profit. She frowned. 15? No, that won't work. 10? That will work for me. Now, could you procure a catalog that I can use as my guideline for what I can order through you? I'm sure I'll still need to special order some things from other establishments, but I'll do as much of my business with you as I possibly can. Ryan reached down into his bottom drawer, where all of his ordering catalogs were. He could always order more. He handed her the catalogs. Will those do? These will do nicely. She got to her feet, looking absolutely elegant. Thank you for your time, Mr. Ziegler. Amanda offered him her hand. Please, call me Ryan. I don't think I can do that. Have a good day. With that, she turned on her heel and left the store. As Ryan watched her go, he had to wonder why she'd been so cold to him when she'd been perfectly kind the day before, if a little condescending. Perhaps she hadn't liked the joke he'd played on her, but it was probably more likely that she just didn't think a hardware store owner was worth her time. He walked back to the front of the store and started stocking the shelves. Usually, he worked with the customers as much as possible, but he needed to work off some irritation. He wasn't sure why, but that woman got under his skin faster than any other he'd met. He'd have to call Nick and ask him about her so he could find out if she was always that rude. He knew his best friend was working closely with all 5 of the sisters, and he'd know what was up with her. As he stocked the shelves, he spent a lot of his time answering questions for people who walked into the store. When it was finally time for lunch, he went into the break room with the PB&J he'd made for himself that morning and took out his phone, dialing Nick's number. When his friend answered, he got straight to the point. I need the dirt on Amanda Romriell. Is she always as rude as she seemed today? Amanda? She's as sweet as can be. I've never had a problem with her. She seems to stay to herself more than the other sisters, but she's not rude at all. Why do you ask? Ryan sighed, explaining the situation. Do you think she's upset about the joke I played on her? I don't know. The sisters are always teasing each other, but it's different when it's a stranger. I bet she felt humiliated. Why didn't you just tell her who you were? I wish I had now. She's awfully pretty, but she's so citified. I can't think of a better word. She belongs in Salt Lake City, not here. Bear Lake is for people who are down to earth. She doesn't even know what that means. Nick laughed. She is the best dressed of the bunch. And the most proper. She wears nice clothes even around the house. I don't think I've seen her in jeans yet. What kind of crazy woman doesn't wear jeans? I think you're worrying about her a little too much. I haven't heard you talk this much about a girl since you were trying to get Karen Bradley into the back seat with you. You never did succeed. Ryan rolled his eyes. Are we still living in high school? Don't you realize that once you pass the 30 mark, your high school glory days are over? Hey! Bite your tongue. Mine will never be over. Whatever. I don't know why I still call you friend after all these years. Me neither. Bad taste? Nick asked. That's got to be it. Bye. Ryan hung up abruptly, though he wasn't angry at all. If not for Nick and his parents, he wasn't sure what he would have done when his parents had died. Nick's parents had taken him in for his last 2 years of high school, and they'd treated him as if he really was a member of their family. They'd saved him. He walked through the store, straightening displays and putting nails back into their proper holes in the nail section. He never knew why people couldn't put everything they touched right back where they found it. His store was his everything. His father had started it when he was a boy, and he'd hired a manager for it shortly before he died. When Nick had taken over from the manager, he found out the manager had put the store into a great deal of debt, which wasn't something the manager had the ability to do, but he'd done it anyway. Ryan had worked for more than a decade to pay off those debts, and he'd lived on a shoestring budget so he could do so. Now he could happily say the whole store was his again. It didn't matter to him what snobs like Amanda Romriell thought of him. He'd worked hard to get where he was in life, and he was darn proud of his accomplishments. She was just a snob anyway. When he got off work that afternoon, he drove across town to the house he'd grown up in. Thankfully, it had been paid off, and after he had graduated, he'd been able to move back there to live. It was just a small 2-bedroom, 1-bath home, but it was his, and he owed nothing on it. That was the only thing he needed, a place to sleep and a place to shower. He wasn't much of a cook, he preferred takeout, but he usually made do with a sandwich or two. It fit into his budget better. Of course, Amanda Romriell probably ate caviar for breakfast and washed it down with champagne. She certainly seemed the type. He heated up a TV dinner for supper, sticking it into the microwave. He could nuke like nobody else. It was a skill that bachelors needed to have. Ryan ate his meal in front of the television, like he did most nights. He got a call shortly before bed from an old friend asking him to go to a local bar with him and be his designated driver. Since his parents had been killed by a drunk driver, everyone knew he didn't drink, and he was always willing to help out. Tomorrow night, he asked John, a friend in Georgetown. I can do that. He knew his friend would pick up his tab if he drove, and a free meal was always good. He hated to spend money on eating out, so he relied on his friends to treat when he drove them. He had a good life, even though he didn't always remember it. As he went to bed, Amanda Romriell's face flashed into his head again, and he wished he could tell the pompous woman what he thought of her, but she was going to bring him more business. Business that would make it easier for him to expand. Asterisk. Amanda picked up lunch on the way home from the store, and then everyone gathered around the table to eat the burgers and fries she'd brought with her. That man. So, you all know I was meeting with the owner of the hardware store, right? Well, the cashier I talked to the other day ended up being the owner, and he never even bothered to tell me. What a jerk. If I didn't feel like I needed to do business locally, I'd have already contacted my regular suppliers and told them we were going to keep working together. Nick bit his lip, obviously trying not to laugh. Amanda glared at him. Do you know this Ryan Ziegler person? He's been my best friend since grade school. Sorry, Amanda. I do think he was a jerk, but he's never known how to act around a girl he thought was pretty. I refuse to believe it has anything to do with that. He's just a jerk. Amanda looked at Alyssa for support. He's a jerk, isn't he? Alyssa shrugged. I met him, and he was really sweet. Not a mean bone in his body. I think you two just got off on the wrong foot. We got off on the wrong something. Amanda frowned as she picked at her food. I think I'm going for a walk on the beach. He makes me mad enough to throw rocks. As she left, she realized she hadn't been quite that angry at anyone in over a year. Not since Dylan, well, not since what had happened to Dylan. She didn't want to think about that, though. She wanted to think about sunshine and roses. Dwelling on the past robbed you of your own future, and she was going to have a future. No, she'd probably never meet another man that she could love. Dylan had been perfect for her. Now she'd walk through life alone, wishing she could have had the kind of love she needed. How different things would be if he was still at her side. She told herself often that she was over him, but a little part of her still wished he was someone she could look up to for the rest of her life. Amanda stopped and looked out over the beautiful lake, the lake of her childhood. She'd learned to swim in this lake, and she'd been on her first kayak on it as well. It was home, and she was home. She'd have to just remember that there was still life to live after the only man she could ever love had left her. Chapter 3. Amanda had a lunch date on Saturday with Hannah, Alyssa's childhood best friend, to talk to her about what she wanted for her bookstore she was going to open. Amanda had always considered Hannah a friend-in-law, because she was so close to Alyssa that everyone else just kind of paled into the background. She liked the other girl a lot, but she didn't have the kind of connection with her that her sister had. They ate at the Bear Lake Pizza Company, and Amanda got right down to business. So, I know this place is going to be more than a bookstore, but I really want to know what you're planning for it. Do you have the blueprints? She knew she could do her job better if she could get an idea of the design of the building. I brought the blueprints with me, because I figured you'd want to see them. Hannah pulled the designs in a cardboard tube out from under the table, handing them to Amanda. So, my vision is so much more than a store. It's a bookstore, a bakery, a sandwich and soup restaurant with a small seating area, and a daycare all in one. There will be 2 stories, and the books will be up, but there will be an accessible elevator for people who can't climb stairs. The cafe and bakery will be on the first floor, along with the daycare. What I'll do for the daycare is have an area sectioned off in the very middle of the store. Someone will be hired to run it, but every mother will be able to see her child from anywhere in the store. I'll also provide alarms that will be attached to both the child and the mother's shirts. If the mother tries to leave without the child, they will be detained. If someone else tries to take the child, an alarm will go off. It won't be easy for someone to snatch the child with the security I plan to have in place, though. Amanda looked at the blueprint and traced an area that was in the shape of a square on the first floor. Is this the daycare? She asked. Yup. Hannah looked very excited to be able to talk about her plans. We'll start with the daycare. Do you have a theme in mind for it? Hannah shook her head. Disney? Mickey? Fairy tales? I would go with Mickey if I were you. Mickey and Minnie. I can do a lot with those 2 rodents. Amanda had a notepad out for taking notes of what the other woman wanted, and she quickly jotted some words down. Mickey and Minnie sound great. Make it happen. We could even have the sensors we put on their clothes polka dots. Red like Mickey for boys. Pink like Minnie for girls. Amanda wrote down her thoughts as she had them. That sounds fun. I think a themed center will be awesome. Hannah grinned. It's hard to believe little Amanda is so good at what she does. Amanda wrinkled her nose. I'm not as little as I used to be. She shook her head. It was odd to be remembered by someone from before she was even born, but Hannah had been around for that long. Well, of course not. When I first met Alyssa, your mom was expecting you. Hannah sighed. Sorry. I shouldn't mention your parents. I don't know why not. I miss them every day, but I think it's good other people remember them just as fondly as my sisters, and I do. Amanda looked back down at her notes. Do you want some sort of cubbies in the daycare area? Do you know what you want there? Hannah shook her head. Not at all. I'm going to have you talk to Sarah, my friend who will be running the daycare. Does that work for you? We can decide on colors and themes, but she's going to need to have a say in the actual usage of the room. Amanda nodded, turning to another page. Now let's talk cafe. I know that's not exactly what you're calling it, but it sounds right. What do you want there for colors? Maybe we could do subdued colors there. For some reason I have in my head that this will be a place mostly women will be, so something pretty. Not feminine, but colorful, if that makes sense. Yup. It does. Do I need to talk to your cafe manager for that? Amanda was willing to have a meeting with all of them or meet with them individually. She really didn't care. The whole area will be mostly shared by my bakery and the cafe. I will get the two of them together to talk to you, if that will work. Absolutely. Their names? Amanda had her pen poised to write the names of the women she had to talk to. The baker is Rochelle, and the cook is Erica. Hannah looked over as the pizza was brought to their table. I'm pigging while we do this. I'm joining you. Amanda grabbed one of the plates and piled a couple slices of pizza on her plate. The bookstore itself. What are you looking for there? I want there to be comfortable places to sit all around the store. The books will be upstairs, so I want a balcony overlooking the downstairs, and I want a reading section right in front of the windows that will look out over the lake. Hannah waved her hands around as she talked, obviously incredibly excited about her future in the store. Amanda nodded. So, when is your builder breaking ground? Not until the end of June. Hannah laughed softly. I'm getting ahead of myself by discussing decorating, huh? Not at all. I usually wait until a place is built, but I can be looking for special things between now and then. One suggestion I have is to hook up with a local artist and display his or her paintings all around the store. You can have a discreet price underneath each painting, but you're making money for the artist and for yourself. And more than that, you'll have decorations that won't cost you anything. The same could go for a local sculptor. I keep saying local, because people are looking for things that are local around here. That's very true. Hannah pursed her lips as she thought. I have a few people I can contact, and I will. I think that's a great idea. Now, the children's books. I assume you want a children's area where mom and child can shop together and sit and talk about what they want. I know that's what I'd want. Hannah nodded. Maybe a seating area and a dry erase board with markers? How about a Lego table instead? You don't want the kids writing on the books. Good point. I always assume parents will watch the little tykes, but realistically that doesn't happen. Amanda nodded. You see my point now. She took a quick break to take her first bite of pizza. I love the pizza here. I think it's been owned by the same man since I was a little girl. She looked back at her notes. Any particular color for the chairs and couches in the reading area of the store? Not at all. Okay. You're the manager of the book area, right? Hannah shook her head. No, I'm the overall manager, but I won't have a section of the store like the others will. Jessica will be the manager of the bookstore. Sounds good to me. Amanda closed her notebook and pushed it to one edge of the table. So, how's life? Hannah laughed. Business first. I grew up, Amanda said with a grin. Tell me a little about Nick. He's not going to mess with Alyssa's head like Tim did, is he? Absolutely not. I went out with Nick a few times, and he was a perfect gentleman. He wasn't right for me, but I do think he just might be right for Alyssa. I don't want her to be unhappy any more than you do. I can't help but worry. Tim really did a number on her, and I think she's just figuring out who she is without him. I believe that. Hannah shook her head. Why did you guys let her go out with him for so long? Let? Did you really just ask me why we let them go out together? There's no letting Alyssa do anything, unless your name is Tim. I want to call him some choice names, but I'm a lady. Hannah grinned. You can't say that to me. I saw you moon a car when you were 10. It's never too early to perfect your moon. Amanda shook her head, a little embarrassed that Hannah knew everything about her. Well, almost everything. Your mother sure didn't feel that way. No, she didn't. Amanda could still remember the scolding she'd gotten, and she hadn't been allowed to leave the house without an adult for the rest of the summer. It had been annoying. Even 6-year-old Lauren had been allowed to leave with Alyssa and Hannah, but not her. She'd really blown it. I couldn't even play in the treehouse after that. You shouldn't have told on me. Hannah laughed. I didn't. The driver came back and figured out who your mom was and told her. I had nothing to do with it. I've been blaming you for that for about 16 years now. Amanda shook her head. She really had held on to a deep dislike for her sister's friend for over 15 years. It was ridiculous now that she thought about it. She never should have mooned that car to begin with. You can stop. Hannah shook her head. It's crazy the things we remember. It really is. Amanda took a sip of her drink. I worked out something with the hardware store owner to get discounts on things I asked him to special order. I'm glad Ryan's working with you that way. He's a great guy. Amanda thought for a moment about telling Hannah what had happened with Ryan, but she bit her tongue. You think? She certainly didn't think he was a great guy, but she wasn't about to disillusion Hannah. I know. I've known him since we were both in school. I think he'd have gone to college and done something else with his life if his parents hadn't died when he was 16. He had to move in with Nick's family. The two of them are practically brothers. I didn't know he lived with Nick. Interesting. More than anything, Amanda found it interesting that neither man had told her. She felt like there were too many secrets around town that only the locals knew. Even though she'd been spending summers in Richland her entire life, she wasn't part of the Knowing Stuff Club. It was annoying. After lunch, she picked up her notebook. Set up an appointment with me with your friends. We'll figure out what we want to do with the rest of the store. Amanda grinned. I'm so excited to get started. Hannah smiled. Thank you. I so appreciate you coming here and walking me through everything. It's my job. With that, Amanda left the restaurant and headed for her car. She needed some alone time after being in public for so long. She wished she wasn't so nervous in social situations. Once in the car, she took deep, healing breaths. There was nothing she needed more than some time away from everyone. Maybe in the sauna. No one else liked it except Alyssa, and she'd already had her time in there for the day. Chapter 4. On Monday afternoon, Amanda wandered into the end of Green Gables' room to see how things were coming along. As soon as she stepped inside, she gasped with shock. What color are you painting this? Yellow. I'm using the cans you had mixed. Amanda closed her eyes and counted to 10. You were supposed to be using lemon yellow, not pineapple. This is a disaster. An unmitigated disaster. Nick squinted at the wall. Looks lemon yellow to me. Well, maybe to the untrained eye, but nothing else is going to go with the walls if you keep going. She sighed. I'm going to have to go talk to your friend and get the right color, and I'm really not looking forward to dealing with him. Amanda wasn't sure if she'd strangle him or try to speak kindly. She wanted to hurt him. Do you want me to go with you? Nick asked, a half grin on his face. No. Never. Why don't you grab Alyssa and go out for supper? This will be taken care of by the time you come in tomorrow morning. It was already 4, and he usually worked until 7, but the paint would be all wrong if he kept going. What kind of moron didn't know lemon yellow from pineapple yellow? Ugh. Nick closed up the cans and carried them to Amanda's car, putting a tarp in the trunk and then placing the cans on top of the tarp. Don't go crazy around any of the corners, and you'll be just fine. Thanks, Nick. Enjoy your night off. Amanda drove through the quiet streets of Richland, seething inwardly. There was something about Ryan that made her want to smack him upside the head like a mother cat whapping a misbehaving kitten. As she drove, she imagined actually doing it and the look on his smug face when she was done. Oh, that sounded glorious. Of course, she couldn't do it, but her imagination was strong. When she got to the store, she grabbed a cart from the parking lot and heaved the cans into it. She walked straight to the aisle that Ryan was working on and frowned at him. I asked for lemon yellow, and I got pineapple yellow. Ryan looked at her for a moment, trying to figure out what on earth she was talking about, and then he happened to see the cans of paint in her cart. Oh, the paint? Yes, the paint. What did you think I meant? Amanda shook her head, glad the store was mostly empty. I had no idea, to be honest with you. It sounded to me like you'd lost your mind. She brushed her hair out of her face, more annoyed with him than she had been when she stepped through the door. She imagined a giant hand coming down out of the sky and kitten slapping him and suddenly felt a great deal better. I need the paint exchanged for the color I requested, please. Ryan shook his head and walked over to open the paint. This looks like lemon yellow to me. Well, it's not. Amanda pulled a bunch of paint strips out of her purse, all linked together with a metal binder loop. She flipped through the colors until she found the yellows, and she showed him the difference between lemon yellow and pineapple yellow. You carry that everywhere you go? Ryan asked, frowning at her. He obviously thought she'd lost her mind. Of course I do. It's a tool of my trade, and I always need to have it. I have all the colors memorized, of course, but my clients need the visual. She snatched the paint strips out of his hand and dropped them back into her purse. Well, what? Are you going to fix your mistake? She asked, putting her hands on her hips. Was he naturally dense or just putting on a show for her? Because I got the yellow a little bit off? No one is ever going to notice it. He was shaking his head at her as if she was a small child who was confused about something. Of course they will. I can't believe you even said that. Everything I purchased for the end of Green Gables room was purchased to match lemon yellow. I can't let things look terrible because you don't know your colors. We're going to be having paying guests stay in that room, and they certainly don't deserve that sort of treatment. I happen to know my colors very well, thank you very much. I cannot believe I'm having this conversation with you. Are you always going to be a thorn in my side? He frowned at her. Are you done playing games with me about your real identity? Are you going to stop messing things up? Amanda moved toward him, standing toe to toe. She didn't care that he was a good 6 inches taller than she was. He was a jerk, and he needed to be put in his place. Why couldn't she smack him upside the head? She would feel so much better if she did it just once. Ryan sighed. I'll fix the paint. And I'll be sure to look at the color before I accept any more from you. Now, isn't that nice of me? I'll be like a teacher, checking to make sure your math problems are done correctly. Are you always this anal? Only when people don't listen to what I ask for and mess things up. She smiled sweetly at him, but she knew her face was red. She was too furious for it not to be. A shovel was leaning against a display not 3 feet from her. She could wallop him with that, but she looked terrible in orange. Ryan merely grunted and took the cart from her, pushing it to the back of the store where the paint was mixed. While he was messing with the paint, Amanda wandered around the store, looking at the different things available there. Truly, for a small store like his, he had a lot more items available than she would have thought. She needed to compliment him on it so they could get back to being civil with each other. Smacking him wasn't the solution. She had to just be kind. It was the only answer. Sometimes it took everything inside her to keep calm and be good to others. As she walked through the aisles of the store waiting for him to be finished, she found things that were out of place and put them back where they went. Maybe she was a type A personality, but what difference did that make? Surely he'd appreciate his store looking like it was supposed to. When someone came into the store looking for something, she showed them where it was so Ryan could keep working on her paint. Someone else took his spot at the register, and the man was checked out, and she headed back to the paint area to check to see if her paint was finished. When she got there, he was just starting to put the lid onto the last can. "Oh, let me look at it first. We're losing 3 hours of work today because we had the wrong paint. I'm hoping that won't be repeated." She looked into the can and nodded. "That's perfect. See? You can follow instructions." When she saw the look on his face, she frowned. "That came out rude, and it wasn't meant that way." "I'm sorry." Ryan looked at her with surprise. "Sorry for being rude or for always thinking you're right." "I am right about the colors, but sorry for being rude." "I shouldn't have said that to you, and I'm very sorry I did." Amanda frowned. "Will you accept my apology?" As much as she didn't want to make peace with the man, they were going to be working together too much for her to keep up the animosity. "Only if you accept mine for deceiving you about who I really am." "I do." She smiled a little. "I've been pretty stressed since the death of my parents, but that's no reason to take it out on you." That's when she remembered he'd lost his young. She waited to see if he'd say something. "Losing your parents is rough." "I know." He led her to the front of the store, carrying the 3 cans of paint for her. "I'm sorry this was wrong. We'll do our best to make sure the colors match your ideas in future." "I would appreciate that. So much of what I do is based on the color of the walls." It was an absolute disaster when I saw the color Nick was painting them. "There's no charge for these, of course, because it was our error." "I hope to see you soon, Miss Romriell." "Thank you, Mr. Ziegler." "I'm sure you shall." "I can't seem to keep myself out of hardware stores." Amanda put the cans into a cart and pushed them out to her car, putting them into the trunk on the tarp. When she got in the car, she smiled a little. She felt like she'd made peace with the man. He certainly didn't need to be her arch nemesis in this tiny town. She didn't want any enemies at all. Asterisk. As soon as Ryan closed the store, he called Nick. "What is with Amanda? That woman is going to drive me to drink, and you know how I feel about that. Stick to Dr. Pepper's, man." Ryan sighed. "What are you doing this evening?" "I could use a game of pool to cool off after my run-in with Miss Know-It-All." Nick laughed. "You two really do rub each other wrong, don't you? She complains about you, too." Ryan was interested in that information. "She does? So, she thinks about me?" He liked the idea of her complaining about him because it meant he was on her mind when she was away from him. She was awfully pretty, even though she was the most annoying woman who had ever lived. "Don't get carried away. She thinks about throwing darts at a picture of your face." Nick had always had a way of bringing him back down to reality with his words. Ryan laughed softly. "You know, that wouldn't surprise me even a little." "It shouldn't. I'm going to let you go, though, because I got the night off while Amanda sorted out the paint disaster. No one could see the difference in those 2 colors. That woman is insane." Now Ryan was angry all over again. The color was not that bad. "So, do you want to shoot some pool while you're on your night off? I actually have Alyssa with me. We're having a nice dinner, and no, you're not invited." "Who will she go out with after she dumps you, then?" "Tell her I'm thinking about her and I'm waiting on the sidelines for her to come to her senses." "Never." The line went dead, and Ryan couldn't help but grin. Nick had certainly found the best Romriell sister and was keeping her for himself. He decided to go to Max's without Nick. There were always people to hang out with, and he was craving their chicken fingers anyway. They had the best in all of Idaho. Maybe in all the world. When he got to the bar, he sat down and ordered the chicken fingers, and Max automatically brought him a Dr. Pepper. "How'd you guess?" Ryan asked, a grin on his face. "Well, unless you started drinking the hard stuff since the last time you were here, I'm going to guess that Dr. Pepper is still your drink of choice. Don't know how you can stand that nasty stuff, but whatever floats your boat, I guess." Max was about Ryan's age, and they'd been friends for a long time. Nick had renovated the bar as soon as Max purchased it, and now it was a place that was easy to spend time in. Another friend of his walked in, then, and the two of them played a game of pool while Ryan waited for his chicken fingers. "I don't know why you keep playing with me," Ryan said to Sam. "Do you just like it when you get your butt handed to you?" "Oh, you talk a lot of crap, but you know I'm better than you," Sam retorted. By the end of the night, Ryan knew he'd done just the right thing. Being around people was just what he'd needed. Chapter 5. At lunch on Friday, Lauren looked up from her food. "I need a game night. We should all hang out tonight and just be sisters." "No Monopoly," Alyssa said. "Taylor cheats." "I don't cheat. I'm just so good, I always win." Taylor flicked her brunette hair over her shoulder. "In a game that's mostly chance?" Alyssa asked. Taylor shook her head. "I just know all the tricks." Alyssa narrowed her eyes. "Like setting the dice? And borrowing from the bank?" "Yes," Taylor said, winking at Alyssa, who shook her head. "Why do you always need to win any game having to do with money?" Amanda asked. Taylor shrugged. "I guess if I can't win at games with money, then I can't win at money in real life. It's not like I'm greedy or anything. I just want to be successful, and that means working hard and making money." Lauren held up both hands. "No Monopoly. Who's in for a game night?" "I'm in," Alyssa said. "I'm going out with Nick tomorrow night, but he's going to hang out with Ryan tonight." Amanda bristled at the man's name. "He's annoying." She couldn't understand how Nick could be friends with Ryan, whether they'd been practically brothers or not. "Nick?" Alyssa asked, obviously surprised. "No, you know I love Nick." "Ryan. The man needs to be smacked upside the head 10 or 20,000 times." Amanda took a bite of her crepe, pointing her fork in the air. "I don't know what it is about that man, but he's on my very last nerve." "Does that mean you're in for game night or not?" Lauren asked. "Fine, I'm in." "Taylor?" Lauren was doing her best to get everyone to agree, and Amanda was sure it was because she wanted to nail down the food. "Sure." Taylor shrugged. "We'll start when Nick leaves." Lauren clapped excitedly. "I'm going to go to Montpelier and grab Studebakers for supper." "Doesn't that sound good?" "I still can't decide if they're the best pizza in the valley, but I'm hungry for pizza, and tonight, that's where we'll get it from." Amanda watched as everyone excitedly discussed toppings. "I'm going to wear my pajamas." She couldn't remember the last time she'd just hung out in her pajamas and spent time with her sisters. It was definitely time. "Of course you are," Taylor said. "What's the point of a girls' night with no pajamas?" While they got their plans in order for the big night, Amanda just sat and observed her sisters. Alyssa was animatedly talking about what toppings she needed to have on their pizza. Taylor was talking money and smiling, obviously excited for them all to spend time together. And Lauren was over the top about everything, but more loving than anyone she'd ever known. They were each so different, but they were all good people. That's what mattered most. After lunch, Amanda got her sketch pad and took it out toward the water. It was almost Memorial Day, the big opening of tourist season, and it was still pretty darn cold. 2 more weeks and the crowds would descend. Shortly after that, the band B would be open. She wondered just how she'd feel with strangers at her breakfast table. She sat down on a bench, built by her father's own hands, and she began to sketch ideas she had for the bookstore. Nothing was more exciting to her than a blank slate for her to fill with beautiful things. She was ready to get started. Asterisk. Game night was fun. Lauren and Amanda headed to Montpelier for the pizza around 6:30, knowing Nick was off at 7. As they drove, Lauren lamented. Amanda had always felt like the odd sister out. Alyssa and Taylor were close. Kayla and Lauren were close. But she was right smack in the middle and didn't feel super close to anyone. I love that all of you have these big, wonderful dreams and you're making them come true, Lauren said. But I don't even know what my dreams are. How did you figure out what your dream was? I went out and found it. Remember when I was a kid and I was always carrying around a sketch pad? I thought I would be a great artist. When I went to college, it was with the intent of being an artist, but then I discovered I had a distinct talent for interior design. Not only a talent for it. I love it. I would rather design spaces than do anything else. Amanda knew her voice was excited as she talked about her passion for her work. Everyone should get to be paid for something they loved doing as much as she loved interior design. What about love? Lauren asked. Think you want to marry and have kids? I thought so once, but now, I think that ship has sailed. Amanda didn't want to talk about Dylan. All of her sisters knew she was serious about someone for a little while, but she wasn't anymore. No one really knew why. Why do you think that ship has sailed? Alyssa is 4 years older than you, and I think that she and Nick are going to marry before too terribly long. It's not about age. It's that I don't really think I could ever belong with anyone. I'm too nervous around men to be able to really connect with one, if that makes sense. It wasn't the whole truth, but her sister didn't really need to know everything. It was her life and her secret to keep for as long as she chose. Lauren shook her head, stopping at the stop sign between Paris and Montpelier. It doesn't make sense to me at all. You're a beautiful, intelligent woman. There's a man out there who will appreciate you for who you are. Amanda sighed. Maybe. For now, I'm content with my work. No, you're not. I can see it. Well, it's not a big deal at the moment, okay? Lauren sighed dramatically. I guess. I wish I could convince you otherwise, though. It just seems to be who you are to marry and have little ones. You can have twice as many for me. Amanda was done with the topic, and she hoped Lauren would sense that. They both went in to get the pizza and then went to Berline's. They wanted ice cream. Junior mint ice cream for Alyssa, and the rest of them would eat chocolate marshmallow. Alyssa was just completely addicted to junior mints, and it was impossible to convince her something else might be just as good. Once they were back in the car, Amanda steered the topic to how the house remodel was going. I really do think we're going to be ready by June 1st. It's getting a little exciting. She couldn't wait to see people's reactions to the rooms they designed. Lauren grinned. Oh, I'm bouncing off the walls. I can't wait to cook for all those people, even though I know it's odd. If it's what you enjoy, then it's not odd at all. Why would you think it was? I just never saw myself as a cooking for others kind of girl. I guess it goes with having a degree in liberal arts, though. Amanda laughed and shook her head. Lauren blamed everything on her liberal arts degree. I think it's great that you're enjoying cooking. It's not something that I've ever really loved to do, but I don't mind it. I would take turns with you if you weren't having so much fun with it. Lauren laughed. I really am. Tomorrow morning I'm making orange muffins. I've never made them before, but I saw a recipe, and I cannot wait to try them. It's the right answer for me for sure. Well, you just keep cooking, and I'll do what I do. Have you thought about a culinary school? Amanda was sure that was the next step if Lauren was serious about cooking for a living. She'd been thrown into it at the band bee, but if she loved it so much, why not make a career out of it? I have a little. I think I want to work for the band bee for a while first and see if it's really what I want to do. It's hard not having a dream. Amanda looked over at her youngest sister and couldn't help but grin. She was really silly about some things. I'm surprised you didn't want to cook tonight. I wanted to have pizza, and I did make dessert and snacks for later. What did you make for dessert? Amanda asked. The smell of the pizza is starting to make me really hungry. Lauren laughed. I made butterfinger pie. It's a super simple recipe, but I think we'll all love it. You know as well as I do that Alyssa is going to be disappointed that you didn't make junior mint pie. She'll live. I got junior mint ice cream for her, and I even picked her up a couple of more boxes of junior mints. Amanda grinned. You know her so well. I know she doesn't feel alive unless she's had junior mints in the past hour. Lauren pulled into the driveway. You grab pizzas. I'll grab ice cream. Together, they carried everything into the house, and Lauren went to the intercom to call everyone down. Once they were all crowded around the table, the laughing started. Amanda was a little overwhelmed by her sisters at times, but that night felt good. She needed them and their constant support of her. What game are we playing? Did anyone decide? She asked. I think since we have even numbers tonight, we should play encore. We all love it, and we have fun when we play, Alyssa suggested. That's fine, but maybe apples to apples after. That one is always fun. Taylor liked apples to apples more than the rest of them did. All right. Sounds good to me, Lauren said. She grinned at her sisters sitting there. I sure wish Kayla was here, but I'm happy to spend my evening having fun with my sisters. Thanks for agreeing to this. Taylor grinned. We've all been working pretty darn hard to get settled here and to get the band bee ready for occupants. I think all of us are happy to have a night off. Even me. Amanda said with a grin. Gives me something to do with Nick hanging out with Ryan tonight. Ryan's a really nice guy and a little lonely, I think. He'd be good for you, Taylor. Alyssa chomped into her pizza, obviously happy that there was extra cheese. Amanda felt her stomach turn at the very idea. She didn't want him for a brother-in-law. She wanted to jump up and yell that it was a terrible idea, but she sat quietly instead. Taylor shook her head. No way. Not happening. I'm going to be single forever. Lauren shrugged. Maybe he'd be good for me. He's too old for you, Amanda said, frowning at her youngest sister. 10 years is a lot. Alyssa tilted her head to one side, looking at Amanda. Are you sure you don't just want him for yourself? You've got to be kidding me. He's the most annoying man I've ever met. No, I don't want him for myself, or for a brother-in-law. As far as I'm concerned, he can be eaten by the Bear Lake monster. There was general laughter as they all took their plates to the kitchen and shoved them in the dishwasher. Where are we going to play? Taylor asked. Let's play in the living room. Do you remember how much fun we always had playing games while lounging in there, with all the cousins around us? It was almost as much fun as using the secret passageways and bugging the cousins, Amanda said. The singing game was a lot of fun for all of them, and Amanda and Taylor beat Alyssa and Lauren. When they finished, they picked up the game and carefully put it away, very aware that it was out of print. They couldn't ever lose that one, because they wanted to always have one to play. After they had ice cream and laughed and talked a little more, Amanda headed up to bed. She was at the extent of her people time and really couldn't do much more. When she got to her room, she dug in the bottom drawer of her dresser and pulled out the picture of her and Dylan, looking down into his piercing green eyes. "I'll never stop loving you," she whispered, kissing her fingers and pressing them to his lips in the picture. Then she carefully tucked the photograph back where she'd found it and closed the drawer. In some ways she'd moved on completely since he'd left, but in others, she would miss him forever. As she brushed her teeth, she wished that everyone would just understand her desire to stay single. It wasn't that odd, was it? Taylor said she wanted to stay single, and no one questioned her. Amanda wasn't sure why she was any different, but obviously she was. Chapter 6. Ryan sat in Max's with Nick, nursing a root beer. "She makes me absolutely crazy, Nick. How on earth do you manage to stay sane in a house full of estrogen?" "Well, the oldest of the estrogen pack is pretty special. I bought an engagement ring." Ryan stared at his friend. "Didn't you learn your lesson with Cammy?" Nick frowned. "Alyssa is nothing like Cammy. She's kind, sweet, and wonderful. And don't you try to tell me differently. I've only met her a couple of times. I wouldn't try to convince you of anything. Her sister, Amanda, however, is a pain in my backside. Have I told you that yet? She is insane, and she brings her insanity into my store like a cloud that hovers over her. I just want to, I don't know what I want to do. Go out with her maybe? That's what it sounds like to me." Nick took a bite of one of his chicken fingers. "No, I really don't think you understand. I want to strangle her half the time." Ryan knew Nick must not really be listening to him if he thought they should go out. It was a terrible idea. "Well, you can't do that. You look horrible in orange. Better come up with another plan." Nick didn't seem at all bothered that Ryan had just said he wanted to strangle his girlfriend's sister. "You really don't seem to be taking my side on this." "How can I? I'm in love with Alyssa, and her sisters are important to her. Just suck it up, Buttercup. You'll find she's amazing when you get to know her a little better." Ryan shook his head. "You're not listening to me. I don't want to get to know her better." Nick just laughed and kept eating. "So, pull when you finish stuffing your face?" Ryan asked. Nick nodded, and Ryan knew the subject was over. Asterisk. At the store on Monday morning, Ryan was explaining how to set up a display to a relatively new employee when he saw her out of the corner of his eye. Amanda Romriell, the burr under his saddle, the annoying woman who was constantly badgering him, if only in his mind. She walked straight up to him and smiled. "I need some help finding something." "I'm happy to help." He wasn't, but sometimes lies were necessary for his business, and this was definitely one of those times. "What are you looking for?" Amanda smiled, happy he was taking her seriously for a change. He seemed to look down his nose at her, which she didn't understand at all. "I am looking for a doorknob." She trailed off when she saw he was leading her to their regular, boring doorknobs. He gestured to them and started to walk away. "No, Mr. Ziegler. I'm looking for something different." Ryan stopped short, running his fingers through his hair. "Of course, you are. Why wouldn't you be?" She frowned at him. "Have you seen the old-fashioned knob that has a white handle and little flowers on it?" "Doorknobs don't have flowers, Miss Romriell." "Some do. Seriously, my grandmother had one at her house when I was a little girl." "All right, then. Doorknobs in my store don't have flowers on them." Ryan wasn't sure how to get through to the woman. Alyssa pulled one up on her phone. "This is from a picture in one of your catalogs. May I give you the item number, please?" "If you must." Ryan had no desire to order a doorknob with flowers on it. What was wrong with the woman? Thank you. I would be thrilled to give it to you, so I could order it, and then the last piece would be in place for the end of Green Gables room. Exactly how many of these rooms are you designing? He asked. 11 total, but we only want to have 7 done by June 1st when we open. Do you have anything else I need to order while I'm at it? If he was going to make an order, it should be for more than one item. I made you a list. Amanda smiled, and for a moment, she looked less perfect and very pretty. Great. A list. Amanda dug through her oversized purse for a moment and pulled out the list she'd made. Here you go. I put which catalog and the item number for each thing I need. Of course you did. It's my life goal to make your job as easy as humanly possible. How am I doing? He laughed. You really think you're making things easier for me, princess? He had no idea how she would get that idea. She was a pain in his behind. She sighed. I'm not a princess, by any stretch of the imagination. Then why are you always dressed like one? And you grew up in a house that is as close to a castle as we have in this area. I think you're a princess. I'll call you Princess Amanda. I would really rather you didn't. How long will it take for those items to come in? She asked. A week tops. Most likely 2 or 3 days. Ryan would put the order in as soon as she left. Even though she was annoying, she was going to be a very good customer since she was in the business of helping people decorate. He was the logical place to go for those things, and he wanted the money. Definitely wanted the money. Thank you. Would you prefer I pay now or after delivery? He wanted to make her pay immediately, but he didn't do that for anyone else, so he shouldn't for her. When it comes in is fine. I'll call Nick and let him know. Speaking of Nick, he and Alyssa had planned yesterday, and Nick never showed up. Ryan shook his head. I'm sure he's fine. I haven't seen him. It was strange for his friend not to keep a commitment, though, especially a commitment with Alyssa. Yeah, he showed up today, but he looked a little worse for the wear. No clue at all. Amanda nodded. Thanks. Asterisk. When Amanda got home, she was told that Alyssa was crying in her room. After talking to Alyssa, they made a game plan and decided to go to Logan, where they could eat out, and Alyssa wanted a pedicure. They all piled into the SUV Taylor drove and headed to Logan, all of them a little starved for something other than Richland. As much as they loved the place, they were used to larger cities with more shopping available. They all agreed that retail therapy was exactly what Alyssa needed. They made an appointment at a pedicure place, and the 4 of them all sat side by side. Together, they talked about the remodel and everything they could other than men. Alyssa was going to corner Nick that evening, and Amanda knew the man needed it. But they wouldn't bring that to their sister day. If Nick didn't come clean with Alyssa that night, Amanda would corner him herself and make him explain what his problem was. After their pedicures, they went to Olive Garden, and they laughed and joked over the meal, each of them bringing up even sillier memories to get Alyssa to stop looking so shell-shocked. Then they went for shoes. There was nothing in the world that helped with a mood more than shoes, in Amanda's opinion. Except maybe purses. She liked to be put together well, and she always wore matching shoes and purses. She knew not all women were like that, but it made her feel like she was always ready to give her business card out to someone who was looking for an interior decorator. She'd even gotten into the habit of dressing up at home. After they all chose purses and shoes, they got back into the SUV to head back to Richland. Amanda looked over at Alyssa. I think our timing will be perfect. You can go to see Nick, he should be just getting home. Remember, don't knock. Alyssa nodded, reaching over to squeeze Amanda's hand. Thank you for being my sister. If I had to choose from all the women in the world to be my sisters, the four of you would be my choices, Amanda said softly. Though she may pick one more to be her partner in crime. The drive back through Logan Canyon was a long, twisty one, and Amanda was glad she wasn't at the wheel. She was not a fan of driving through any canyon, and when she was alone, she often drove through Grace, Idaho, which was a great deal out of her way. But that meant she didn't have to drive through any of the canyons that scared her so much. Once they were home, Alyssa left almost immediately, and Lauren headed to the kitchen. We need a special treat to celebrate Nick and Alyssa getting back together. Amanda laughed at her sister's optimism. She needed a bit of it at that moment. I'll watch you cook. Oh, good. Company. That's just what I need, because I'm not sure what I'm making, and you can help me decide. Taylor looked at the other two and shrugged. She took a coat out of the closet and pulled it on. I think I'm going for a walk on the beach. I need some quiet. It sure won't be quiet next week, Amanda said as her sister headed to their private beach. She sat down in a stool across from Lauren. So, what are you making? Lauren pulled out a binder. In here are all the recipes I've been wanting to try. I have the desserts section separate. She pushed the binder across the counter to Amanda. What sounds good? Amanda flipped through the pages. I don't know what we have ingredients for. We have all the basics, but nothing exotic. Finally, Amanda settled on a recipe toward the back of the dessert section. Brownies. But mint brownies. Lauren nodded emphatically. That's perfect. If it goes well, we'll want them to celebrate. If it doesn't, then Alyssa will need them to go with her junior mints. As Lauren whipped up the brownies, Amanda leaned on the counter, watching. Why am I so nervous? Because Alyssa's our sister, and we love her. Amanda felt the same as Lauren. She wanted to be pacing like an expectant father in the old movies, but she didn't want to annoy Lauren with her nervous energy. Once the brownies were in the oven, the two sisters returned to the living room and watched an episode of Gilmore Girls on Netflix. They had to distract themselves somehow. The oven timer was beeping when Alyssa and Nick came into the house hand in hand. Look who I found, Alyssa said with a smile. Amanda grinned at her sister, while Lauren headed into the kitchen to get the brownies out. I'm so glad you did. Alyssa held out her hand to show Amanda the engagement ring that Amanda and Nick had picked out together during Alyssa's short time out of town the week before. It's beautiful. It suits me perfectly. Alyssa looked at Nick as if he'd hung the moon and stars after creating each planet and putting it in place. He's the best fiancé a girl could ask for. Wait, did I hear the word fiancé? Lauren came running in from the kitchen, the oven mitts still on her hands. Engaged? Alyssa nodded, laughing softly at her sister's reaction. See? She held her hand out for Lauren to see the ring. You did good, Lauren said, grinning at Nick and then hugging him. You're my brother now, so I get to hug you all I want. Nick laughed. You're my sister, so I can hug you, too. I'll do my best to treat you well, Lauren said. I've never had a brother before. And I've never been happier for my sister. They were crowded in the living room, still talking animatedly, when Taylor came back inside. After showing off her ring, Alyssa kissed Nick goodbye, and the sisters had a wedding planning meeting. When that was finally over, Amanda headed up the stairs to her room. The day had once again been too filled with people. She was ready to get her own place again, but it just wasn't time yet. Chapter 7. Amanda locked her bedroom door and pulled out the photo of Dylan. She'd arranged with her mother to have Dylan over for dinner, so he could meet the family on Sunday, but on Friday evening, he'd been gone. She remembered everything that had happened with him as if it had been yesterday. When she'd gotten off work later than usual one Friday evening, she'd stopped at the convenience store around the corner from her house, and Dylan had been behind the counter, reading Moby Dick. She'd been fascinated by the book choice, because when she'd had to read it for college English, she'd wanted to stab her eyes out with forks. Of course, it had cured her insomnia for her. She'd gone to the counter and put her milk, bread, and eggs up there so he could ring them up. He'd been kind and just a bit dashing in her eyes. "Moby Dick? Are you reading that on purpose?" she asked. He laughed, his whole face lighting up. "I'm working on my master's in English, and this was assigned. There is no choice about reading it, and I hope I don't ever have to give it any attention again." He quickly scanned her items. "Sounds like you've read this snoozefest." "I have. And it really is a snoozefest. That describes it exactly. I'm a huge reader, and I couldn't make it through 2 pages of that book without falling asleep or wanting to get up to do my dishes or vacuum. There's something seriously wrong with people who think that book is great. Maybe dementia has made them forget what a great book really is? It's the only reason I can think of that anyone would think Moby Dick is great." He took her card and ran it through. "You know, you make me wish I had a corny pickup line for every woman I met. I'd use it on you." She shook her head with a grin. "And why would you do something so ridiculous?" She loved the idea of him trying to pick her up. "Because I want to go out with you, but I'm too embarrassed to ask you out." Amanda felt the heat rise to her face. "Why are you embarrassed?" She noted that his name tag said Dylan. "Because you're beautiful and we hate the same book." "Why would you want to go out with me?" She laughed softly. "You know, I don't ever go out with strangers, but I think I could make an exception for you. Because your taste in literature is absolutely impeccable." "You could?" he asked, blinking twice. He pulled a cell phone from his pocket. It had a cracked screen, but he navigated it perfectly. "Do you live nearby?" She smiled. "About 2 blocks from here, which is why I shop at this store." "Are you new here?" "Yup. I've been tutoring math, but it's summer, and there just aren't as many students in the summer. I'll have more again in September when people get confused." She frowned for a moment. "Didn't you say you were getting a master's in English? Why would someone working on a master's program in English ever tutor math?" It didn't really make sense to her. "Sure. That's why I'm a popular tutor. I'm an English person who can explain math in a non-mathy way." His green eyes looked deeply into Amanda's. "What's your number?" She rattled off her number quickly, not even hesitating. This guy was obviously the real deal, and nothing could keep her from at least giving him a shot. "How much longer until you graduate?" "December. And I already have a job lined up teaching at the university. I'm really excited." "That sounds wonderful." Amanda grinned at him. "I'll look forward to hearing from you." She was excited at the prospect of going out with him. He was right for her. She could feel it deep inside her. "Don't worry, I'll be in touch soon." Amanda didn't want to leave, but there were other customers coming into the store, and he obviously needed to read Moby Dick. "Talk to you soon, then." She walked out and got into her car. She hadn't even buckled yet when a text message sound alerted her. She picked up her phone and read the message. "Told you I'd be in touch soon. LOL. You're silly, Dylan. Wait, I never caught your name." "It's Amanda. I was worried I'd have to call you hey you for the rest of our lives. Thanks for giving me your name and saving me from a life of ridiculousness." A life? She couldn't help but wonder if he was losing his mind. They'd met 15 minutes before. "I'll save you from anything. I'm not a princess waiting to be saved." "Sounds good. I'll be calling you tomorrow and begging you to spend an evening with me." I'll talk to you then. She drove the rest of the way home with a grin on her face. After putting away the few groceries she'd purchased, she made herself a quick supper of French toast. She loved to have breakfast for supper. It was one of her favorite things in the whole world. She went to bed, feeling as if she was floating on air. Dylan was awfully special, and she couldn't wait to get to know him better. He called the next afternoon, inviting her out for dinner and a movie. I have to be at work by midnight, so we'll have to hit an 8 o'clock movie, if that works for you. That's fine. What time do we want to have dinner? I'd say 6:30, if that works. I'll come get you, but only if you'll text me your address. She laughed. I'll text it to you if you'll ever get off my phone. There was something about him that made her comfortable enough to tease him right away. She'd never had that with any other man, and it felt right to her. Don't need to tell me twice. I'll see you in a couple of hours. As soon as they'd hung up, she texted him her address as he'd requested, and then she went into her room to figure out what to wear. There had to be something that was appropriate for a date night with the most wonderful man alive. She just had to figure out what it was. 2 hours later, she was dressed, her hair was fixed, and she was wearing makeup, which was a rarity for her when she wasn't working. She hated feeling like she always had to wear makeup, and she chose to spend most of her weekends at home vegetating so she didn't have to bother with it. When her doorbell rang, her heart beat faster, and she walked to her door, opening it wide. I brought you flowers. Amanda smiled widely. Flowers? You're so sweet. She carried them into her house, noting that he waited at the doorway for her. Come in while I put these in water. Dylan walked into the house and stood fidgeting from foot to foot, obviously uncomfortable there. Your house is really nice. I still live in a college apartment. She smiled. You're getting a lot more education than I did. Once the flowers were settled, she walked to him and smiled. Let's go eat. What do you have in mind? He shrugged. I figured Texas Roadhouse or something easy. That works for me. No problem. She locked her door and followed him out to his vehicle. It was definitely a college student vehicle, too. She thought about tossing him her keys so they could be more comfortable, but she decided against it. It would be so much better to meet him where he was. On the drive, they talked about books. All the books. They agreed on most literature, but he was a huge fan of All Quiet on the Western Front, and she found it too depressing. After dinner, he took her hand as they walked back to his car, and she was so happy. It felt strange holding hands with a man she'd just met, but it didn't feel bad at all. She wanted to do it more. They saw a fun movie, and the two of them shared a popcorn. She wanted to rest her head on his shoulder, but she thought maybe it was too soon for him. He was so shy and sweet. After the movie, he drove her home, and they sat in his car talking for a while. She looked at her phone for the time. His car clock had definitely seen better days, and invited him inside. You have an hour before work. You can go in early or hang with me. Dylan got out of the car and gallantly came around to open her door for her. It struck her as a little funny with the rust heap he drove, but she really didn't mind. In her house, she led him to the living room and curled one leg under her on the couch as he sat beside her. She wanted to talk to him forever. I have never felt this kind of instant connection with anyone, Amanda said. I'm so glad you were reading Moby Dick so we could commiserate together. He laughed. I'm glad you were willing to strike up a conversation about it. She couldn't help but wonder if he'd kiss her that night, because it was all she'd thought about. Every time their fingers brushed. Every time their eyes met. She wanted him to kiss her. She wondered what it would be like. Are you even listening? He asked. Sorry. Wool gathering. She was embarrassed to admit she hadn't listened to a thing he said, but it was the truth, and she couldn't lie to him. "What were you thinking about?" "Kissing." As soon as the word was out, Amanda covered her mouth with her hand. She'd never meant to say that. How could she? "Oh, really?" "No, I don't know why I said that." Dylan moved toward her on the couch. "Amanda, may I kiss you?" She nodded, her eyes not leaving his. "Yes." He took both her hands in his and leaned down for a kiss, both of them tilting their heads the same way, and then they laughed. When his lips finally met hers, he kissed the smile right off her face. Amanda felt the kiss from the top of her head all the way down into her toes. She gripped his hands more tightly and wished she could just crawl into his lap and kiss him forever. Finally, when he broke off the kiss, he rested his forehead against hers. "You're pretty wonderful, Amanda." "Ditto." "Then you'll go out with me again?" "I don't have a ton of time, but I don't want you to forget me." Dylan seemed earnest about seeing her again, and she couldn't be happier about it. She knew then that they would spend their lives together. She laughed. "I don't think any girl could ever forget a man who kissed her like you just did." "I'll take that as a compliment." "Trust me, it's meant as one." He got to his feet. "As much as I hate leaving you, I have to work. I'll walk you to the door." She didn't want him to leave. She wanted him to stay there with her forever. Already in her head, she was thinking about the perfect wedding dress and how handsome he'd look waiting for her at the end of the aisle. Her sister Taylor had always said she'd be alone forever, but Amanda had always known she would marry and have children. It just felt right to her. "May I call you tomorrow?" "Weekdays will be hard with school and tutoring and work, but weekends are a little easier, and we can talk more. And I'll do my best to text you every day." Amanda smiled. "That would be nice." He kissed her once more as he hurried out the door. She didn't know his last name yet, but she sure planned to put it at the end of her name someday. Amanda spent the whole weekend at home, grocery shopping and preparing for her week. She liked to cook a couple of big batches of meals on Sunday and then eat them throughout the week. Once a month, she and her sisters would descend on their parents, and they'd have a noisy family dinner after church. But this weekend was just for her. For her and for falling in love with Dylan, which came as naturally as picking a flower and walking down the street. Dylan was special, and she was going to spend the rest of her life with him, because there could never be a man who suited her half as well. As she showered and got ready for bed, she felt sorry for all the people in the world who weren't in love, because for the first time in her life, she was. And it was wonderful. Chapter 8. 6 months later, Dylan had graduated from his master's program and was teaching at the university. He was still busy, but his life had settled down to a normal busy and not a college student working 2 jobs busy. Every day he and Amanda grew a little closer. In May, almost a year after they'd met, she decided it was time to introduce him to her parents and her sisters. So, she invited him over for their monthly Sunday dinner, where all the sisters would be. Amanda hoped Tim wouldn't be there the Sunday she brought Dylan home. Tim was too critical of Alyssa, and she didn't want anything to do with him. Ever. 3 weeks before the dinner she'd decided to take Dylan to, she called her mother to ask if it would be all right. "You're seeing someone?" her mother asked with surprise in her voice. Amanda knew she wasn't being critical. It was just that she'd always been self-conscious around men and she had dated very little. "Yeah. He's teaching at the university. I met him when he was working on his master's and reading Moby Dick in a convenience store while he worked behind the counter." Her mother laughed softly. "Did he hate Moby Dick as much as you did?" "He did. We couldn't help but strike up something after that." Amanda smiled as she remembered their first meeting. Everything about their relationship was perfect, and she knew it would continue on the same way. He was so special to her. "What's his name?" Amanda smiled, knowing her mother would immediately accept him. That's how she was. Dylan Ellingson. I can hear that you're in love just by the way you say his name. I'm really happy for you. How long have you two been seeing each other? About 10 months. I know it's really long without saying anything, but how could we be serious when he was so busy with school? Now we have time to really get to know each other. Amanda didn't mention that he was there watching movies with her almost every night. They spent as much time together as they could. I can't believe you've never even mentioned him. Her mother sounded a little exasperated. I didn't want to let you meet him until I was certain we were going to work out. You don't need me parading a half-dozen men through your house to meet you. Besides, she'd wanted him all to herself. Why should she share? That's very true. Amanda knew that her mother understood that all of them only believed in dating if you were serious about someone. They weren't at all the kind of women who would flit from one relationship to another, let alone from one bed to another. Well, I'll see you for lunch that day. With Dylan. For the next few weeks, her mother called her every day to ask more questions about Dylan, and Amanda talked about him readily. Now that her mother knew about him, the floodgates were opened. She had no really close friends she talked to about men. She mainly had friendly business acquaintances. On the Friday night before Sunday dinner with her family, they were watching a movie, and she was all snuggled up against Dylan. I can't believe I forgot to get popcorn, she said, wanting to kick herself. I was at the grocery store tonight, too. The convenience store has popcorn. Want me to go get some? She bit her lip. I don't want to ask you to do that. But she did want popcorn. Movies were never the same without it. He laughed. In other words, you want me to, but you're trying to be polite. Maybe. Her whole face lit up in a smile as she looked at him. He was truly the only man she would ever love. She could feel it deeply inside her. He stood up and then bent down to kiss her. I can't believe I almost forgot to kiss you goodbye. You're only going to be gone for 10 minutes, she said, laughing up at him. But she gladly kissed him back. I'll be right back. He hurried out the front door, promising to be back in just a few minutes. While he was gone, she used the restroom and checked on her hair, applying more chapstick. The arid heat of Salt Lake City made her more than a little dry all the time. When she saw he wasn't back yet, she put the supper dishes into the sink. She'd cooked for him as she usually did on the weekends. She wasn't a huge fan of cooking, but she'd do anything for Dylan. 45 minutes later, he wasn't back yet, and she decided to go to the convenience store to see if he was broken down or something. His old bucket of rust wasn't the most reliable vehicle she'd ever seen. As she drove, she worked out in her mind how she could drive him to work, and maybe he could just use her car for a few days. It wouldn't hurt her any. She pulled into the parking lot of the convenience store, and she was stopped from going in by a police officer. The lights on top of 3 police cars were all flashing, making her just a bit dizzy. I'm not sure what happened, but my boyfriend Dylan is in there. He came to get us popcorn. Could you just let him know I'm waiting in my car? Amanda asked. She was sure he was just giving a statement. The officer frowned, looking pale. I'm afraid he was killed when he tried to prevent the cashier from being shot. What? No. Dylan is going to meet my mom this weekend, and he is going to ask my dad for permission to marry me. We've already talked about it. You have to be mistaken. The officer shook his head. I'm afraid there's no mistake. When Amanda tried to run around him to see for herself, he caught her by the shoulders and stopped her. You really don't want to go in there. He was shot in the head. Twice. She dropped to her knees, right there in front of the convenience store where they'd met just 10 months before. The 10 most wonderful months of her life, and they were over. She covered her face in her hands and wept, crying more than she'd ever cried in her life. Why had she forgotten the stupid popcorn? And why hadn't she been willing to just watch the movie without it? She knelt there for a while, before the kind officer took her arm and helped her back to her car. "Do you need me to call someone for you?" Amanda shook her head. What was the point? He was already dead, and her life was over. The following days, weeks, and months, Amanda leaned on her mother strongly. When her mom encouraged her to talk to her sisters as well, she refused. Why bring them down? They already have lives of their own. Besides, it felt like she was betraying Dylan's memory when she talked about him to too many people. Asterisk. Amanda shook her head and stared down at the photo of the two of them she'd had framed shortly after his demise. How could she not love the man with everything inside her still? He'd been perfect for her, and in her mind, they would forever be together, in life or in death. She showered and changed into her pajamas, not able to stop thinking about Alyssa and Nick. She was so happy that Alyssa had finally found a man who loved her as much as she loved him, and, more than that, who was worthy of her. But she was sad for herself. Alyssa would never meet Dylan. None of them would. He was just a memory that still hurt when she thought too much about him. He'd died in May of the previous year, so a full year had passed since he had left her. And she still woke up every morning with him as the first thought in her mind. She wished it had helped her when his killer had been caught, but it hadn't. Because inside, she knew she was his killer as surely as if she'd held the gun to his head herself. She'd needed popcorn. No one needed popcorn that much.